Today is essentially opening day part 2 for MLB DFS because most teams have turned the card over and gone back to the aces of their rotation, meaning on this slate alone, we have Shane Bieber, Trevor Bauer, Steven Strasburg, Lucas Giolito. I consider Brandon Woodruff and Kevin Gausman to be aces personally. I might be alone in that, but a lot of good pitchers available for today. And again, that's always a good thing for us for DFS. We want choices. We don't want to be using really bad pitchers, but it's also tough to whittle our list down and decide who should sit atop our list for MLB DFS. That's what we'll do here today. Get you set for the slate and make sure you are prepared to win some money tonight over on FanDuel. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to preview Tuesday night's 10-game main slate with lock set for 7:07 this evening. Slate has been altered since it was posted because of the postponements last night. So if you put in lineups last night, make sure you are changing them to account for the fact that the Mariners-Orioles game is no longer on that slate, but it is still a 10-game slate with lock at 7:07. So plenty of goodness available for today. As mentioned, probably a good thing that we have fewer choices because there were just too many to begin with. Weather for today, a couple of cooler games. The first one is in Chicago, 51 degrees there for the White Sox as they host Cleveland, and that's actually a good thing because that's where we have Bieber v. Giolito. We want cooler temperatures for pitching. Both those guys get it. We'll happily take that for sure. It's also just 52 degrees in San Francisco for the Reds and the Giants, so downgrade hitters and upgrade pitchers there. We'll talk about one of those pitchers in things to watch for today, because I do think they're in a pretty good slot even before considering the weather for that game. It is not just MLB for today here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. As always, Tom Vecchio has you covered with NBA and NHL. Back here later today to talk some PGA with Brandon Gdula for the RBC Heritage. That is at 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page, also up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed immediately after that. Brandon and I also back later today for the Q&A session. Brandon has you at 3:30 talking the RBC Heritage, talking betting and DFS for that. I'll be back on at 4 p.m. Eastern to go through today's MLB DFS slate. So if there is a pitcher you love who I do not discuss here on the solo shot for today, or some stacks you want to discuss, feel free to swing back, talk about it today, 4 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Get your questions in. We can talk whatever you want to discuss. Get those questions in there, and we'll get you set for tonight's slate. Speaking of tonight, hello, baseball and fantasy fans. FanDuel has a special contest for you running every day. The FanDuel Home Run Challenge is free to play. All you have to do is draft a team of 3 players, and you'll receive points for the home runs that they hit. Compete for a chance to win a part of the $10,000 prize pool. Head over to FanDuel today and play the Home Run Challenge for free. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel Fantasy app. Eligibility restrictions apply. Pitching preview for this Tuesday main slate, Shane Bieber is the highest salaried pitcher on FanDuel. He checks in at 11-2. Got Trevor Bauer at $11,000. Steven Strasburg is 10-4. Lucas Giolito is $9,800. We got Dylan Bundy at $9,000, and then Brandon Woodruff, Kevin Gausman, Luis Castillo, Jack Flaherty, Kyle Hendricks, and Hyun-Jin Ryu are the others at $8,000 or higher. So a lot of guys in that second tier for today, but also a lot of guys in the upper tier, all of whom I want to use. So we got to rank those guys and figure out how we are going to allocate our exposures for DFS. And I think that there are 2 separate ways to play this. Straight up versus how I can view things for tournaments based on expected popularity. And I think those will be 2 different discussions. But straight up, I kind of think that Trevor Bauer is interesting. He's very risky right now because I don't know if he'll have to alter things, given that he's under investigation for potentially altering baseballs. It adds extra uncertainty into his projection for tonight, but I do still think it's worthwhile to go here with Bauer. And a big part of that is the matchup. You know, we wouldn't take this risk if he were facing the Braves. We will do it if he's facing the Rockies, which he is in Los Angeles. I used Bauer when he was facing the Rockies at Coors Field, so it feels pretty obvious we'd use him in Los Angeles. They have an 82 WRC plus against righties with a 26% strikeout rate. Of the true studs on this slate, this is the best matchup any of them has. And Bauer, if we can believe his sample, is awesome. He has been using his four-seam fastball less over his 2 starts this year. And in those two starts, he has a 2.63 skill interactive ERA with a 37% strikeout rate. That's actually going back to last year when he started to scale back on that four-seam fastball. And he has a 5% walk rate. He is allowing a bit too much hard contact, so that's a negative, but the Rockies don't really provide much hard contact themselves, so that helps quite a bit. I understand if you want to avoid Bauer due to the investigation, it is an increased risk. He could get ejected. He could pull a Michael Pineda, get tossed right away if they find him with sticky substances on the mound. So it's not a play that'll be for everyone, but I do still think that he is the top play on this slate. And I will personally be going there. The hope is that the risk around Bauer leads to decreased popularity. He's not going to be like contrarian by any means, because I think people realize the upsides in using him here, but any level in decreased popularity from where he should be is advantageous for us. So if you're risk averse, do not go here. You have plenty of alternatives, and we're going to talk about them, and I think that they're tremendous too. I just think that playing things straight up, Bauer is the number one play on tonight's slate at $11,000. I'll go there, but I understand if you don't want to go with. So let's talk about ways you can go if you don't want to go Bauer. I do give Lucas Giolito a slight leg up over Shane Bieber. And they're actually facing each other, which means that Giolito is facing Cleveland, Bieber gets the White Sox. And that's the main reason for favoring Giolito here, in addition to the $1,400 savings you get in salary. Both teams strike out at a relatively even clip. Slight edge for the White Sox at 25%, Cleveland's 24%. So a slight favor for Bieber there. But the performance gap in the two offenses is pretty big. The White Sox have a 109 WRC plus against righties. Again, this is based on their current active roster since the start of last year. Cleveland is at 93. Big gap there. So the White Sox do strike out a tiny bit more, but they're the better overall offense, which is a plus for Giolito, who is not facing them. If there were a big gap between Giolito and Bieber, I'd probably just go with the more talented guy, but I think they're relatively even. If we look at each guy in their most relevant sample, Bieber has a 2.94 skill interactive ERA with a 41% strikeout rate. Giolito 3.07 skill interactive ERA, 37% strikeout rate. So edges to Bieber in both categories, but Giolito has better walk numbers and better hard contact numbers. That all leads to Giolito having the safer overall profile while having a similar ceiling. That's why I'm going to have Giolito higher on my list for tonight. I will say, though, that Bieber is super interesting if you get the vibe that he will be super under-rostered relative to Bauer and Giolito. He still does lead this slate in strikeout rate, and he's facing a higher strikeout opponent, so I am very down for Bieber if I get the read that he will be under-rostered. It's just kind of hard to tell that at 9 o'clock in the morning on the day of the slate. So for right now, I'm going to go Bauer 1, Giolito 2, Bieber 3. Bieber has a good chance of sliding up that list, though, depending on my read of the roster rates by the end of the day. And we'll talk more about that during the afternoon stream. Should have a better idea of where the public will likely be going there. So tune in at 4 p.m. to see if things change. But as of now, it's Bauer, Giolito, Bieber, the rankings. But Bieber, interesting to watch if he does wind up being under rostered. If you're going to deviate from those guys tonight, you need a lot of points because they're going to get a lot of points for someone. And that means it's probably not a night to go with a super low value play, but you can get a guy with huge upside who can match those guys at just $8,800, and that's Brandon Woodruff. He's facing the Cubs for the second straight start. And I listed that as a reason to have Freddie Peralta as my second value play last night, as opposed to my first. And he did wind up being the top guy because Carlos Rodon got scratched, and that bailed me out because Peralta was awesome. So it might not wind up mattering that it's a repeat matchup. The Cubs might be in such a bad slump that they can't hit anybody right now, regardless of how recently they've seen him. And that's good for Woodruff, who doesn't need that boost. He has not gone longer than 78 pitches so far this year, but he got 7 innings on just 74 pitches his last time out. So I feel like Woodruff can go deep, even if he hasn't done it just yet. He allowed just 1 hit and struck out 8 guys over those 7 innings, and he's been doing that for a while now over his past 8 starts. With his changeup usage down a bit, he has a 2.95 skill interactive ERA with a 34% strikeout rate. So if we're comparing him to those studs, his strikeout rate 2.5 percentage points lower than Giolito's, a little bit about 3 lower than Bauer, and about 6 or 7 lower than Bieber. But he's actually facing a higher strikeout opponent than Giolito because the Cubs are at a 26% clip since the start of last year. So truly the only negative I see in Woodruff's profile is that they just saw him last week. That's not as big of a concern as I thought it was going into last night, especially because Woodruff has more diversity in his pitches than Peralta does. So I am very okay making Woodruff my top value play here at $8,800, and I think he has enough upside to justify using him even on a slate filled with aces. Like last night, I didn't really want to use people outside of Glasnow and Cole because I thought they were so far ahead of the crowd. Here, I do think you have wiggle room to go with Woodruff. We'll talk about Kevin Gausman, too, and things to watch. Kind of the same thing there, but overall, I think that Woodruff, enough upside to justify using him even on a slate with Giolito, Bauer, and Bieber. As far as the stacking goes, using the Dodgers as a stack may seem tough given the salary we're allocating to our pitchers because they've got some definitely some studs in there, but they're not all that high salaried, and we do have some mid-salaried pitchers who stand out, specifically again Giolito, Woodruff there too. So I'm comfortable putting the Dodgers at the top of my stacking list. They're facing Antonio Senzatela again, and this time it's in Los Angeles. That's good for Senzatela, but he has a profile we can stack against no matter where he's pitching because he just allows so many balls in play. He's throwing more sliders this year than he was last year, and sliders are a strikeout pitch. Increasing a slider rate can often lead to more strikeouts, but it hasn't happened thus far for Senzatela. He has a 10% strikeout rate across 2 starts. That's actually down from 14% last year. He's not letting up a lot of hard contact, which is his big calling card, but it goes back to the discussion we've had a couple of times here on the podcast. When you allow so many balls in play, the aggregate number of hard hit balls can be higher even if the rate of balls in play that are hard hit is lower. Senzatela is on the extremes of both there. We saw this in action last year. He had 7 starts on the road, so outside of Coors Field, let up 6 runs to the same Dodgers team in the same ballpark in one of those. He had several others where he allowed 4, and this Dodgers offense, even as beat up as it is, can take advantage of guys who let up so many balls in play. So I'm going to be in on them here, even if it is a bit cumbersome with so much salary allocated to pitchers. So it can be tough, but I think there are ways we can make it work. And one of the guys that can make it work is Gavin Lux. He is unlikely to bat leadoff like he did over the weekend. I would expect Mookie Betts probably to be back in there, but I do think that Lux works lower in the order too. He has a 39% hard hit rate and a 34% fly ball rate versus righty since the start of last year. He is $2,600. I am expecting to build around him even as he does slide back down in the order because the salary there is so nice for Gavin Lux. I would also go to Zach McKinstry if he were to crack the lineup again. Not expecting that, given, again, some of their guys could be healthy. But there are a handful of value plays here, potential value plays, I should say, to help you stack the Dodgers while still getting 2 guys like Giolito and probably Woodruff more realistically than Bauer and Bieber. So the Dodgers not going to give you a lot of value outside of Lux and trying to get up to the studs, but I think we can get some of that value from the Rays. They're facing Kyle Gibson in Tampa, and Gibson did bounce back in a big way in his second start. He had 6 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts, so a really nice outing for Kyle Gibson there. But the larger sample on Gibson is still something we can stack against. He's been throwing a cutter more this year, which is new for him, but we saw a shift towards more wipeout pitches, we'll call them, cutters or sliders down the stretch last year. So there's some overlap here. So we're up to a 9-start sample on Gibson where he's throwing some kind of wipeout pitch more often. In that time, he has a 4.63 skill interactive ERA with a 22% strikeout rate and an 11% walk rate. That means he's not going to allow as many balls in play as we would ideally like, but the key here is he's not getting strikeouts. That's the kryptonite of this Rays team, is strikeouts, and he's not getting those right now. The other thing here is that the Rays have a lot of lefties, and that's especially big against Gibson because he's really struggled versus lefties since the start of last year. He has a 14% strikeout rate against lefties with a 36% hard hit rate allowed. The Jays, the team that Gibson faced last week and did so well against, not a lot of lefties on that team, so a very different matchup here as he faces more of a lefty-heavy lineup. And that puts the Rays in a good spot as a value stack for today. Brandon Lowe's off to a really rough start so far, but I think he's undersalaried at $2,700. I would say he should probably be the first guy you lock in on this team. I do still like Yoshi Tsutsugo as a value play. He is $2,400. He has not clicked yet, but he does have a 48% fly ball rate against righties since the start of last year. So in his career, he's probably going to get dumped from the leadoff spot eventually. But for as long as he's there, I am okay leading on him as a value play just because that salary is so low. And, eventually at some point that does matter. So Austin Meadows is $3,200. I can take that for sure. But I do think between guys like Tsutsugo and Lowe, you're going to get a lot of assistance in trying to get up to your high-salaried pitchers or potentially stack them with the Dodgers as well for today. Another place you can go for value outside of Mike Trout is the Los Angeles Angels. They're facing Danny Duffy, and Duffy looked good in his debut. He went 6 innings of shutout baseball with 5 strikeouts, but that game came against Cleveland, which is a pretty rough offense. The Angels do get downgraded here without Anthony Rendon, so take them down a notch, but I think even after taking them down that notch, I would still go with the Angels offense over Cleveland's. And importantly, Duffy didn't look too terribly different from last year. His velocity on his four-seam fastball was up a tiny bit, and he did throw it more instead of his sinker, which is a good thing. We always want more four-seam fastballs instead of sinkers, so good for Duffy there. But he let up some hard contact, didn't get any ground balls, so I think that that's what we should expect for Duffy this year. Decent strikeout numbers, not a lot of walks, but a lot of fly balls and potentially some hard contact as well. And if we're looking for stacking, that actually does grade out pretty well. So I think that puts the Angels in play for tonight. And the Rendon injury does hurt, but it also moves some of the lower salary guys up in the order a bit. It's definitely a good thing for Justin Upton. He is $2,700. If we look at him versus lefties since the start of last year, a 46% hard hit rate and a 50% fly ball rate. And if you look at his ISO, he has turned that into good numbers too. So it's not just the peripherals for Upton, also good results against lefties, at least for him. Albert Pujols can still hit it out against lefties. He's $2,400. He kind of needs a double dong to pay off. So I'm not gonna try to go out of my way to get Pujols in there, but he works. I'm not super into David Fletcher, but I would rather use him against a lefty than a righty. So it probably sounds like we're pretty wishy-washy here on guys like Fletcher and Pujols, but what they do allow us to do is to get up to Trout. And if we can get Trout with Bauer, Bieber, Giolito, that's going to give us a lot of upside there. So it's not the most exciting proposition, but I think it might be necessary given the way things break for this slate. So the Angels value plays, the Rays value plays can make it a lot easier to get to the Dodgers for your first stack and stick one pitcher who didn't make it into the top 3, I guess top 4 if we're counting Bieber in there too. Even after considering that, I think they are the second strictly high salaried stack behind the Dodgers for today. So Dodgers, Astros for high salaried stacks, Rays, Angels for value, and you can get some value from the Dodgers as well, specifically Gavin Lux. So I think you combine everything together, we should have enough value to get to guys like Bieber and Bauer today. Giolito makes things even easier, as does Woodruff as well. So overall, a fun slate for today. Not an overwhelming number of stack candidates, but that does make it easier to fill out lineups and still get exposure to the proper number of pitchers. That is all that we have for today here on the Solo Shot. But again, if you're watching on YouTube, stick around because 10 a.m. today, we're back with the PGA Heat Check for the RBC Heritage. That is at 10 a.m. Eastern with myself and Brandon Gadula. We are back later today at 3:30 p.m. Brandon has you covered for the PGA Q&A, talking betting and DFS. I'll be on at 4 p.m. talking MLB DFS. So make sure you are subscribed to the FanDuel YouTube page. Also check us out for the Q&A later on Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. Get the questions in no matter where you're watching. We'll answer them live on air. If you have any questions for me, I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed for our MLB, NBA, NHL, PGA, UFC, and NASCAR podcasts all going on right now. So much goodness all in one place. Thank you to our video producer, Calvin Theobald, for setting up everything for this video for today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups for tonight. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.